The world of magic doesn't end with the turning of a page. Love rises and falls anew, forbidden like poison or blazing like a phoenix's flame. The heroes we thought we knew uncover their hearts once more. So step into the enchantment of emotion and welcome to a world where love is written anew. The night was quiet in the Department of Mysteries, that strange, echoing warren of chambers deep beneath the Ministry of Magic. It was long past midnight, and most of the wizards and witches had gone home hours ago. Only one light still burned in the time chamber, a soft, golden glow spilling across rows of time-turners and silvery devices that shimmered faintly as if they breathed. Hermione Granger leaned over a delicate contraption on the main work table. Her hair, tied hastily in a bun, had long since escaped its pins, and curls clung stubbornly to her temples. A quill trembled between her fingers as she made the final notes in her research journal. "This is it," she whispered to herself. "Just a controlled stabilization of temporal flow. Nothing risky." But even as she said it, her heart thudded with anticipation. Ever since the war had ended, she'd thrown herself into understanding time, its structure, its rules, its limits. Too much of her life had been shaped by moments that could never be changed. The time turner she'd once used as a student had been destroyed. But now, years later, she'd been asked to study new theoretical models for safe temporal observation. Her colleagues called the device the temporal lens, a ring of golden glass pulsing with captured starlight. It was meant to open a viewing window into the past, not to transport anyone through it. "Let's see if you really work," she murmured, lifting her wand. "Chronos Visum." The air shimmered. The golden ring spun faster and faster, threads of light spiraling outward. At first, Hermione's excitement drowned her caution, until the hum became a roar. The glow deepened, the temperature dropped, and a wind, cold, sharp, alive, swept through the room. "Wait! No! Stop! Finite!" The spell snapped like a whip. The lens exploded in a burst of white fire, and Hermione was flung backward. For a heartbeat, she saw fragments of time, spinning clocks, falling stars, a flash of a familiar face. And then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on grass. Not stone, not the ministry floor. Grass. Hermione blinked against sunlight, the scent of wildflowers filling her lungs. She pushed herself upright, heart pounding. Around her stretched rolling hills and the glittering surface of a lake she knew too well. Beyond it rose turrets of grey stone, crowned by banners rippling in the breeze. Hogwarts. But something was wrong. The colours seemed softer, the grounds emptier. The air itself felt different, less saturated with the hum of modern magic. Her first thought was disbelief. Her second was horror. "Oh no," she whispered. "No, no, no." A carriage rattled past the distant gates, drawn by sleek black horses instead of thestrals. And as it turned the corner, Hermione caught sight of the crest emblazoned on the door, a silver serpent entwined with an ornate letter, M, a Malfoy crest. Her stomach dropped. She scrambled to her feet and hurried toward the castle. She needed answers, a calendar, a date, anything. But before she could reach the main path, a voice called sharply from behind her. "You there! What are you doing on school grounds?" Hermione turned and froze. A tall young man, barely older than she was, stood beneath an elm tree. He had the unmistakable pale hair and pointed features of a Malfoy, but softer somehow, untouched by the arrogance she knew so well from Draco. His grey eyes studied her with suspicion, and his robes bore a polished Slytherin crest edged with silver thread. Hermione stammered. Her mind raced. She couldn't reveal who she was. Not yet. I'm visiting from Beauxbatons. He raised an eyebrow. At dawn? Alone? Hermione drew herself up. I was told to arrive early. The headmaster is expecting me. The young man hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to believe her. You'll want the side entrance then. Visitors aren't allowed through the main gate without escort. I'll take you. She nodded, trying to mask her relief. Thank you. As they walked toward the castle, she dared a sideways glance. He looked familiar. Not Draco, but close enough to make her uneasy. You're a student? She asked. Abraxas Malfoy, he replied. 7th year. Hermione almost stumbled. Abraxas, Draco's grandfather. She managed a polite smile. Hermione, Delacour, she lied quickly, the first name that came to mind. Abraxas inclined his head, apparently satisfied. Welcome to Hogwarts, Miss Delacour. I'll introduce you to Professor Dippet. Her thoughts whirled. Armando Dippet, the headmaster before Dumbledore. That meant she was somewhere in the 1940s, the same decade Tom Riddle had been at school. Inside the castle, everything looked familiar, yet older. The paintings wore fresh varnish, the suits of armor gleamed brighter. Students in long, formal robes crossed the corridors, chatting in hushed tones. Hermione caught snippets of conversation that confirmed her fear. Riddle's organizing another slug club meeting tonight. Heard he's got the head boy badge this year. Tom Riddle. Hermione's pulse raced. She'd read every record, every warning. To be trapped here, in his time, was dangerous beyond words. She needed a plan, a way back. But before she could think further, the torches along the wall flickered, and a low hum of magic rippled through the hall. The sound was oddly familiar. She turned toward it instinctively, and there he was. Draco Malfoy, older, sharper, standing in the middle of the corridor, wand in hand, eyes wide with the same shock mirrored in her own. He looked at her, disbelief warring with relief. Granger, he breathed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Hermione exhaled the only words that made sense. Oh, thank Merlin. For a moment, Hermione could do nothing but stare. The air between them seemed to hum with something sharp and electric. Draco Malfoy looked utterly out of place in this older Hogwarts. His black robes torn at one sleeve, a faint burn along the edge of his wand hand. His pale hair gleamed like silver in the torchlight, and his expression was a complicated mix of annoyance, confusion, and the faintest trace of relief. Granger, he repeated, glancing around the corridor as if to make sure this wasn't another one of the Ministry's illusions. Tell me I'm not dreaming. Or cursed. Hermione found her voice. You're really here. Unfortunately, Draco muttered. Last thing I remember, I was in the library at Malfoy Manor. My mother had sent me a cursed artifact, said it might have belonged to one of our ancestors. I barely touched it before the whole room exploded in light. Hermione's heart sank. A temporal displacement spell. That must have been connected to my experiment. We're in the same time. He looked around at the corridor, at the portraits of unfamiliar faces, the old-fashioned sconces burning with oil instead of enchanted flame. And which time, exactly, would that be? Hermione hesitated. The 1940s. Draco blinked once, then twice. You're joking. I wish I were. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. So, let me get this straight. We've both been hurled 70 years into the past, into the same castle, with no clear idea of how to get back. That sums it up rather neatly, Hermione said, though her tone trembled. Brilliant. Draco's voice dripped with sarcasm. Truly, Granger, your experiments never disappoint. Hermione shot him a look, but her retort died when footsteps echoed down the hall. Abraxas Malfoy reappeared at the corridor's end, his expression tightening as he spotted Draco. "Who's this?" he asked sharply. Draco froze. For a fleeting instant, Hermione saw real fear cross his face. Abraxas's pale eyes, so like Draco's own, lingered on him with suspicion. Draco started, but Hermione stepped forward, forcing a smile. "He's with me," she said quickly. "My escort, from Beaubaton." Abraxas frowned. "Odd. I wasn't told of any visitors bringing company." Hermione's mind raced. "He's a research assistant, part of my project. It concerns historical magical artifacts." The elder Malfoy's gaze flicked between them. For a tense second, Hermione thought he might press further. Then he gave a curt nod. "Very well, but you'll need to report to Professor Dippet before wandering the grounds. I'll fetch him." As Abraxas's footsteps receded, Draco turned to Hermione. "Your escort?" he hissed. "Would you prefer I call you my servant?" She shot back, whispering fiercely. He glared. "You might at least have chosen something with dignity." "Fine," she muttered, eyes flashing. "Next time, you can explain why you're a duplicate of the head boy's classmate." At that, Draco's irritation flickered into wary understanding. "Right. My grandfather. I suppose that explains the uncanny resemblance." "Precisely," Hermione said. "If anyone realizes who you look like, we're finished. We'll have to be careful." The castle bells rang then, a clear, ringing chime that echoed through the corridors. Students began to emerge from side passages, heading toward the Great Hall. Hermione caught sight of boys in older-style robes, girls in long, pleated skirts, all chattering softly about exams and clubs. And among them, him, Tom Riddle. He walked with effortless grace, surrounded by students who seemed both admiring and wary. His dark hair fell neatly across his forehead. His eyes gleamed with intelligence and something colder, deeper. Even from a distance, Hermione could feel the weight of his presence, the quiet, magnetic charm that history had warned her about. Draco followed her gaze. "Who's that?" Hermione's voice was barely a whisper. "Tom Riddle, 6th year, before he became who he became." Draco's eyes narrowed. "Voldemort." She nodded. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The reality of their situation pressed down like a physical weight. They weren't simply stuck in another decade. They were trapped in the very years when the darkest wizard of all time was still human, still shaping his path. Draco broke the silence first. "All right," he said quietly. "We need a plan." Hermione looked up, grateful for the steadiness in his tone despite his sarcasm. "Agreed. First, we stay unnoticed. No one can know who we are. Second, we find a way to reverse the spell, but without altering history." He frowned. "You mean we can't just fix something? Ask Dumbledore for help?" She shook her head. "Dumbledore's only a professor right now. If we reveal anything about the future, we risk changing everything." Wonderful, Draco muttered. So we're meant to blend in until you find a miracle. Hermione squared her shoulders. We'll manage. We always do. Later that morning, Professor Dippet greeted them kindly but distractedly. Hermione introduced herself as Miss Delacour and Draco as Monsieur Aurélien, both researchers from Beauxbatons, conducting a short study on magical artifacts of British origin. Dippet, apparently delighted by international collaboration, offered them a temporary suite of rooms in the upper tower. Once alone, Draco flopped onto the dusty armchair with a groan. Well, that was easier than I expected. Hermione began unpacking her satchel. Don't get comfortable. We need to find out how much time we have before whatever magic brought us here destabilizes. He smirked. You say that like you're in control of it. I intend to be, she replied crisply, spreading open her notes. As hours passed, they worked in strained silence. Draco traced old magical signatures through fragments of the spell that had flung him here, while Hermione attempted to reconstruct the lens's last known configuration. The room filled with the soft rustle of parchment, the faint scratching of quills, and the occasional muttered curse from Draco when a rune refused to align. By sunset, they'd learned only one thing for certain. Both spells had reacted to a shared frequency of time magic, converging at the exact moment of rupture. It wasn't coincidence. It's like two rivers meeting, Hermione murmured, studying the energy lines that shimmered faintly above the parchment. Our spells collided and pulled us both into the same current. Draco leaned over her shoulder, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath. Then we just need to swim back upstream. She turned to look at him, eyes sharp. It's not that simple. It never is with you, Granger. They held each other's gaze a moment longer than necessary, long enough for something uncertain to pass between them, like the faint tremor before a storm. Before Hermione could speak, a soft knock came at the door. She opened it cautiously and found Tom Riddle standing there, his expression polite but curious. Miss Delacour, he said smoothly, his voice as cold as it was beautiful. Professor Slughorn tells me you're a visiting researcher. I thought I might offer assistance. I have a great interest in magical artifacts myself. Hermione's pulse quickened. She forced a smile. That's very kind of you, Mr. Riddle. Behind her, Draco rose slowly, every muscle tensing as he took in the boy at the door. For a brief, silent moment, the three of them stood together, past, present, and future, woven into one dangerous thread. And Hermione couldn't help but think that time itself had just begun to play its own game. Tom Riddle's smile was perfectly polite, perfectly practiced, the kind of smile that made people trust him without question. It didn't reach his eyes, of course. Nothing ever did. Those dark eyes held something sharper, an intelligence that seemed to measure and weigh everything before him. Hermione felt her throat tighten. It was one thing to read about the young Tom Riddle, to know he had been handsome and charismatic, clever and terrifying in equal measure. It was quite another to stand before him, the faint hum of his magic curling through the air like smoke. Draco was the first to speak. We appreciate the offer, he said, voice smooth but edged with warning. But our work is quite private. Riddle's gaze flicked toward him, lingering for a heartbeat. Ah, you must be Monsieur Aurélien, yes? From Beauxbatons. Draco inclined his head, every inch the aristocrat. Indeed. Riddle's lips curved. Then perhaps we share an interest. I've been studying certain ancient charms myself, particularly those concerning the preservation of memory and time. Hermione forced her expression to remain neutral. How fascinating, she said lightly. Though our project deals more with temporal observation, not manipulation. Riddle tilted his head, curiosity gleaming like a blade. Observation without influence, an admirable goal. Few wizards resist the temptation to alter what they see. His tone was calm, but Hermione caught the undercurrent, an unspoken challenge. Draco must have felt it too, because his hand twitched slightly near his wand. Riddle's eyes shifted between them, and for a moment the silence grew thick. Then he smiled again, and the tension broke like glass. "Well," he said, stepping back, "I won't intrude. If you need anything, access to the library's restricted section perhaps, I have a certain influence with the professors. Don't hesitate to ask." With a courteous nod, he turned and disappeared down the corridor, his footsteps fading into nothing. The door clicked shut behind him. Hermione sagged against the table. "Merlin's beard," she whispered. "That was unpleasant," Draco finished, eyes dark. "He looked at us like he could read our thoughts." "He might have tried," Hermione said grimly. "He was already experimenting with legilimency at this point. We have to be careful. If he even suspects we're not who we claim to be..." Draco cut her off. "Then he'll start asking questions we can't afford to answer." They exchanged a long, heavy look. Whatever fragile safety they'd had in this time had just been compromised. As the days passed, life at Hogwarts in the 1940s unfolded around them like an old tapestry, faded, intricate, and hauntingly familiar. The Great Hall was smaller, the enchanted ceiling less vivid, and the students spoke with formal precision. Dumbledore was a younger man, still teaching transfiguration, and every time Hermione glimpsed him at the staff table, her chest tightened with longing and guilt. Draco adapted quicker than she expected. He moved through the corridors with quiet confidence, easily blending among the pure-blood students. His natural charm, the kind he usually wielded like a shield, worked in their favor. Abraxas Malfoy, still proud and sharp-tongued, had taken a liking to him, and through that tenuous connection they managed to gather fragments of information about Hogwarts' magical infrastructure from the past. Hermione, meanwhile, buried herself in research. She spent long hours in the library, carefully skimming through tomes written decades before her birth. The restricted section held scrolls about ancient temporal magic, the kind that even modern unspeakables barely understood. She copied runes, sketched sigils, and scribbled notes late into the night. One evening, as the clock struck 11, Draco appeared beside her table, carrying 2 mugs of steaming tea. "You're still at it," he muttered, setting one down beside her. "You'll drive yourself mad before you figure it out." Hermione looked up from the parchment, eyes weary but bright. "We're running out of time, Draco. The spell that brought us here is unstable. If we don't reverse it properly, we could be stranded, or worse." He took a slow sip of tea, watching her over the rim. "You're assuming it's possible to reverse it at all." "It has to be," she said fiercely. "There's always a way." He smiled faintly. Still the same Granger, always certain the world can be solved with enough logic and parchment. Something in his tone made her pause. She met his gaze, expecting mockery, but found only quiet admiration. It startled her more than she wanted to admit. "Someone has to think clearly," she murmured. They fell into a silence that wasn't entirely uncomfortable. The candlelight flickered over his face, softening the lines of tension that usually lingered there. For a moment, he looked younger, almost peaceful. Then Hermione's eyes caught movement beyond the stacks, a shadow gliding between the shelves. "Someone's here," she whispered. Draco's wand was in his hand before she finished speaking. The two of them stood still, listening. The footsteps came closer, unhurried, deliberate. Out from the shadows stepped Tom Riddle. "Working late, are we?" he asked mildly, his expression unreadable. "The library does close at 10, you know." Hermione swallowed hard. "We received permission from Professor Slughorn to continue our studies." "Did you?" Riddle said, circling the table. "Strange. I just spoke to him. He didn't mention it." Draco shifted subtly, placing himself half a step in front of Hermione. "Is there something you need, Riddle?" Riddle's eyes flicked to him, cold, assessing. "Only curiosity. You seem unusually well versed in English magic for a Beauxbatons scholar. Tell me, Monsieur Aurélien, where did you study before that?" Draco's jaw tightened. "Private tutors," he said shortly. Riddle smiled. "Ah, the same answer my friend Abraxas gives when he doesn't wish to reveal anything." The words hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Hermione forced a laugh. Too quick, too bright. "You must forgive him, Mr. Riddle. My assistant is terribly private about his education. Old habits, I suppose." Riddle looked between them, and something flickered in his gaze. A glint of recognition or suspicion. Hermione couldn't tell. Then, just as swiftly, it was gone. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Well, don't let me keep you. I'll see you both at Professor Slughorn's gathering tomorrow evening. He insists that all distinguished guests attend." He inclined his head and vanished once more into the shadows. When the door finally clicked shut, Hermione exhaled shakily. "He knows something," she whispered. Draco nodded grimly. "He's testing us, and I don't like how much interest he's showing in you." Hermione flushed. "Don't be ridiculous. He's interested in knowledge, not—" "He's interested in control," Draco interrupted. "I know the type." They stood in silence, the candlelight flickering between them. Outside, the castle slept, unaware of the two misplaced souls trying to rewrite fate under its ancient roof. Hermione gathered her papers, but her hands trembled slightly. "We'll have to go to Slughorn's party tomorrow," she said quietly. "If we refuse, it'll draw more suspicion." Draco sighed. "Wonderful. An evening of forced smiles with your favorite sociopath." "Try not to start a fight," she muttered. He smirked faintly. "No promises." That night, long after Draco had fallen asleep on the sofa beside their dwindling fire, Hermione sat by the window, gazing out at the moonlit lake. The water shimmered, rippling like liquid glass, reflecting stars that had shone over Hogwarts for centuries. For the first time, the weight of it all pressed down on her. The distance from her own time, the danger of the world she'd fallen into, and the strange, growing bond between her and the one person she'd never expected to trust. She glanced at Draco, asleep, a faint crease between his brows even in rest. Maybe, she thought, time wasn't the only thing that could be rewritten. But as the clock chimed midnight, somewhere deep in the castle, Tom Riddle smiled to himself in the darkness and began to plan. The following evening, The castle buzzed with quiet anticipation. Professor Slughorn's soirees were always events of subtle prestige, a place where ambition dressed itself in laughter and charm. Hermione remembered the stories she'd read, how Slughorn's gatherings had once been breeding grounds for the future elite of wizarding Britain. Now she was about to walk into one, disguised, wary, and terribly aware of whose eyes might be waiting. Draco straightened the collar of his borrowed robes, examining himself in the mirror of their borrowed quarters. The dim candlelight gilded the pale angles of his face, lending him the look of an aristocrat from a portrait. "You clean up well," Hermione said, forcing her voice to sound steady. He smirked faintly. "I always do." Then, catching her reflection beside his smile softened. "You, however—" Hermione turned to face him, arching an eyebrow. "What about me?" For a moment his words faltered. She was wearing deep blue, the only gown she'd been able to conjure from the remnants of their supplies. The simple charm she'd used gave the fabric the shimmer of moonlight, and though her hair refused to stay tamed, it fell in gentle waves over her shoulders. "You look—" Draco hesitated, then said quietly, "Like you belong here." She blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. "Let's hope everyone else thinks so," she murmured, and turned before he could see the colour rising in her cheeks. They made their way to the great hall, which had been transformed by candlelight and enchantments into a glittering chamber. Tables of crystal goblets and floating confections circled the space, while students and professors mingled in silks and satin. A small orchestra of bewitched instruments played softly near the dais. Slughorn himself stood at the centre, beaming at his guests. His face was round and ruddy, his gold waistcoat straining proudly against his middle. When he spotted Hermione and Draco, he clapped his hands in delight. "Ah, our esteemed visitors from Beauxbatons. Splendid, splendid. Come in, my dears, come in." Hermione smiled warmly. "Thank you for inviting us, Professor. This is magnificent." "Not at all, my girl, not at all. I do try to bring together the best and brightest, eh? Oh, have you met young Riddle? Brilliant boy, brilliant. You two will have much to discuss." Before Hermione could protest, Slughorn waved over a familiar figure. Tom Riddle approached like a shadow dressed in silk. His dark eyes gleamed, his smile measured. "Professor," he greeted smoothly. "I was just discussing alchemical theory with Horace here, but I never turned down the chance to meet fellow scholars." Hermione forced her lips into a polite curve. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Riddle." Draco said nothing, merely inclining his head in a gesture that could be interpreted as either respect or warning. "Tell me," Riddle began, turning his full attention on Hermione. "What draws you to the study of time? A fascination with history, or perhaps a desire to alter it?" Hermione's pulse quickened. "Neither. Understanding the past doesn't mean changing it," she said, her tone calm but firm. "It means learning from it." "An admirable sentiment," Riddle said softly. "Though I've always found that those who most wish to learn from the past are the ones who long to escape their own." Draco's eyes narrowed. "And which are you?" Riddle's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I've no desire to escape. I intend to shape what comes next." For a heartbeat, silence coiled between them, sharp and glittering. Then Riddle bowed slightly and drifted away into the crowd, leaving a chill in his wake. "Merlin's beard," Draco muttered under his breath. "He's worse in person." Hermione swallowed. He's dangerous, even now. The evening stretched on in cautious conversation and strained laughter. Hermione made polite small talk with curious professors, while Draco charmed a group of students near the punch bowl, deftly deflecting questions about Beauxbatons and France. Every so often, Hermione felt Riddle's gaze brush over her from across the room, a predator's patience cloaked in civility. When at last the gathering began to thin, Hermione slipped out to the balcony overlooking the courtyard. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of rain. She leaned on the stone railing, breathing deeply, letting her thoughts settle. "You shouldn't be alone out here," came Draco's voice behind her. She turned slightly, offering a faint smile. "I needed a moment to think." He stepped beside her, the soft glow from the enchanted lanterns catching in his pale hair. "Riddle's watching you too closely." "I know," she admitted quietly. "But we can't avoid him. If he suspects us, we lose any chance of blending in." "Then we'll give him nothing to suspect," Draco said firmly. "Let him think what he wants." She studied him in the moonlight, the sharp lines of his face, the guarded strength in his voice. It struck her then how different he'd become from the boy she'd once known. The sneering arrogance had been tempered by something else, a quiet steadiness born of everything they'd endured. "Do you ever think about the war?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her, startled. "All the time." "So do I." She glanced down at her hands. "Sometimes I wonder if it ever really ended for any of us." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, "Maybe it didn't. Maybe we're just trying to find what comes after." The words hung between them like a spell. A gust of wind swept through the balcony, stirring her hair, and she shivered. Without a word, Draco shrugged off his outer robe and draped it around her shoulders. The fabric was warm, faintly smelling of parchment and cedar. "Thank you," she murmured. "Don't mention it," he said, eyes flicking away, though a hint of colour touched his pale cheeks. They stood there for a while, side by side, the silence no longer heavy, but strangely peaceful. Below them, the courtyard glimmered with moonlight, and beyond the walls, the forbidden forest whispered secrets older than either of them could comprehend. But peace was a fragile thing. From somewhere in the shadows beyond the balcony, a soft rustle broke the quiet, too deliberate to be the wind. Draco's hand went instantly to his wand. Hermione followed his gaze. A dark figure lingered just beyond the torchlight, half hidden by ivy. For a fleeting second, the faint glow of eyes met theirs, not the gentle brown of a student, but something deeper, colder, unblinking. Then the figure was gone. Draco swore under his breath. "We're being watched." Hermione nodded grimly. "He's testing us again. Riddle won't let go until he knows what we're hiding." Draco turned to her, his voice low and fierce. "Then we'll have to outsmart him. Together." "Together," she echoed, feeling the words settle in her chest like a promise. Later, back in their quarters, Hermione tried to sleep but couldn't. The encounter had left her restless, her mind turning over the danger ahead and the strange comfort she felt at Draco's side. As dawn crept over the castle, she rose quietly and looked out the window. The mist rolled over the lake, pale and silvery, like time itself breathing around her. She didn't know how long they had left in this era, or whether they could escape the snare that time and Tom Riddle had woven around them. But for the first time, She felt that the future, whatever it was, might not be something she had to face alone. And somewhere, deep within the dungeons, Tom Riddle smiled as he penned a note in elegant script, addressed to Miss Delacour and her assistant. He had questions, he wrote, that could not wait another night. The next morning dawned cold and heavy with fog. The castle's ancient stones were slick with dew, the air thick with the scent of damp parchment and candle smoke. Hermione woke with a start. Her sleep had been fitful, filled with flickers of dreams she couldn't quite remember. When she sat up, the faint glow of the fire had gone out, and Draco was already awake, standing near the window. He looked pale in the early light, his expression unreadable. "You were muttering in your sleep," he said quietly. "Something about time and mirrors." Hermione rubbed her eyes. "It must have been nothing, just dreams." Draco didn't reply. He was holding something, a folded parchment, crisp and clean, with writing in perfect, elegant strokes. Hermione recognized it before she even reached for it. "From Riddle?" she asked. He nodded, handing it over. The note read, "Miss Delacour and Monsieur Aurélien, I find myself unable to dismiss certain curiosities about your research. I would be most gratified if you would join me this evening in the old arithmancy classroom after supper. There are matters of theory that might interest you, and I suspect you might find my insights equally useful. Sincerely, Tom Marvolo Riddle." Hermione's fingers tightened on the parchment. "It's a trap." "Obviously," Draco said dryly, "but refusing might be worse. He'll take it as proof we're hiding something." She sighed, sinking into the nearest chair. "Then we'll have to go. But carefully. We can't let him suspect who we really are." "Right," Draco said. "So how do we manage to outsmart the most manipulative wizard of his generation before breakfast?" Hermione shot him a sharp look. "With precision and restraint and a miracle," he muttered. By the time evening came, the castle was alive with its usual chorus of students heading to supper, their laughter echoing down the hallways. Hermione and Draco lingered behind, waiting until the corridors cleared. The old arithmancy classroom was at the far end of the west wing, rarely used now, its windows clouded, its air filled with the faint scent of dust and old chalk. They entered cautiously. The room was dim, lit only by the soft blue shimmer of a hovering flame. And in the center, as if he had been waiting for hours, stood Tom Riddle. "Ah," he said smoothly, "I was beginning to wonder if you'd changed your minds." "We don't make a habit of breaking appointments," Draco replied evenly. Riddle smiled, the expression thin and deliberate. "How admirable. Please, sit." They obeyed. Hermione felt the pulse of enchantments in the air, subtle, quiet, woven into the walls. A truth charm, perhaps, or a listening spell. She had to tread carefully. Riddle folded his hands on the desk before him. "I confess," he began, "your presence intrigues me. Beauxbatons produces fine scholars, but few versed in the subtleties of British magical history. Your knowledge seems extensive." Hermione met his gaze steadily. "We study what others overlook. The past is often written by those who fear it." "Indeed," he murmured, eyes glinting. "And yet you speak as though you've lived it." She forced a calm smile. "Perhaps that's what study does. It makes the past feel alive." Riddle's gaze lingered, searching her face as though peeling away layers of disguise. "Tell me," he said softly, Have you ever heard of temporal magic being used to travel through time rather than simply observe it? Hermione's breath caught. He knew, or at least suspected. Draco leaned back, masking his tension with a lazy smirk. That's forbidden magic, isn't it? Surely even you wouldn't dabble in something so reckless. Riddle's smile didn't waver. Reckless things often yield the most profound discoveries. His eyes flicked briefly to Hermione. Wouldn't you agree, Miss Delacour? Hermione felt the room closing in. The air seemed to hum, her heart beat loud in her ears. Knowledge without discipline leads only to ruin, she said evenly. Some doors are meant to remain closed. For a moment, Riddle's mask slipped, just slightly. A flicker of irritation, quickly hidden. He stood, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Perhaps you're right. And yet, I cannot help but think the world belongs to those willing to open every door. He moved closer, his presence suffocatingly intense. I look forward to learning which kind of people you are. Then, with a final smile, he turned and left them alone in the dim blue light. Draco exhaled slowly. He knows something. He suspects, Hermione corrected, though her voice trembled. We can't stay here long. If he keeps digging, he'll find us, Draco finished grimly. They left the classroom in silence, moving through the corridors like ghosts. When they reached their quarters, Hermione closed the door with a flick of her wand and cast 3 layers of silencing charms. Draco paced. We need an exit plan. If Riddle's already sniffing around, it's only a matter of time before he does more than ask polite questions. I know, Hermione said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. But the magic that brought us here, it's anchored somewhere. We have to find the source. Draco turned to her, frowning. Anchored? Temporal magic always leaves a tether, she explained. A connection between the present and the past. If we can locate it, we can use it to return. Then where do we start? Hermione hesitated, then looked up. With the person who knows more about time than anyone in this era, Professor Dumbledore. Draco's eyebrows shot up. You want to tell him? That's not staying unnoticed, Granger. That's suicide. Not tell him everything, she said quickly. Just enough to earn his help. If anyone can see through Riddle's manipulations, it's Dumbledore. Draco muttered something under his breath, but after a long pause, he nodded. Fine. But if this gets us caught, I'm blaming you. She smiled faintly. You always do. The next day, under the pretense of academic inquiry, Hermione and Draco requested a meeting with Professor Dumbledore. The younger version of the wizard they both revered was striking. Tall, auburn-haired, eyes bright with the same mischievous wisdom they remembered. He welcomed them into his office, which smelled faintly of lemon drops and old books. Visitors from Beauxbatons, he said, smiling. To what do I owe this honor? Hermione hesitated, then began carefully. Professor, we've encountered anomalies in our research, spells that don't behave as expected. We fear some form of temporal disturbance may be involved. Dumbledore's expression grew thoughtful. Time, Miss Delacour, is a far more delicate fabric than most realize. Tug too hard at one thread, and the whole tapestry trembles. He studied her intently, his gaze deep and knowing. You speak as someone who has seen it tremble before. Hermione's breath caught, but Dumbledore only smiled faintly, as though the thought amused him. Take care, he said gently. There are those who would twist time's power to their own ends. Tom Riddle, for instance, a brilliant mind, but far too enamored with control. Draco met his gaze squarely. "We've noticed." Dumbledore's eyes glimmered. "Then you have good instincts. Hold on to them. And if ever you find yourselves lost, remember this. The way back is seldom found by force. It is found by understanding what you were meant to learn." Hermione felt a strange chill run through her. It was as if he already knew everything. As they left his office, Draco spoke quietly. "Do you think he suspects?" Hermione's lips curved into a faint, uneasy smile. "I think Dumbledore always knows more than he says." Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing a pale winter sky. Somewhere within the castle, Riddle's footsteps echoed. Patient, relentless, and for the first time, Hermione wondered whether time itself had brought them here not just by accident, but by design. Days passed, and winter began to whisper through the stone corridors of Hogwarts. Frost gathered in the corners of the high windows, catching the morning light like threads of glass. The air carried the scent of snow. Students wrapped themselves in scarves and laughter, unaware that 2 among them were out of time, living borrowed days. Hermione moved through the castle with a careful calm that belied her tension. She had learned long ago that fear had a scent, and Tom Riddle could smell it better than anyone. She buried herself in research, haunting the library's oldest shelves, piecing together fragments of forgotten lore about time, space, and memory. But every page she turned, every incantation she studied, left her with more questions than answers. Draco, for his part, seemed to thrive on their strange predicament. He had grown quieter, yes, but also sharper, more alert, more focused. Gone was the boy who used to smirk his way through every problem. This Draco was cautious, calculating, and, though Hermione would never admit it aloud, oddly protective. He spent his days listening. Draco had a talent for overhearing the whispers that most ignored. Conversations between Slytherin students, the murmurs of young Abraxas Malfoy's circle, even stray remarks about Riddle's growing influence. One evening, he found Hermione bent over a book so ancient the ink had nearly faded to dust. "You haven't eaten," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm not hungry," she murmured, eyes flicking across a paragraph in Old Latin. Draco sighed. "You'll be no good to anyone if you collapse. Even Riddle's shadow looks better fed than you do." Hermione frowned, but closed the book reluctantly. "Fine, but only if you help me translate this tomorrow. It mentions a temporal echo, a residue left when time is torn. It might lead us to the anchor we need." He nodded, pushing off the wall. "Tomorrow, then. Tonight, you're eating something. That's non-negotiable." There was no teasing in his tone this time, only quiet insistence. It startled her, that softness he sometimes allowed to slip through. They walked together to the kitchens, the castle silent around them, except for the faint creak of the floorboards and the whisper of portraits half asleep in their frames. The warmth of the hearth greeted them as they entered, the house elves bustling about with cheerful energy. Draco conjured 2 plates of roasted vegetables and bread, and they sat near the fire. For a while, they ate in silence, listening to the distant hum of Hogwarts after dark. Then Hermione spoke softly. "Do you ever think about what we'll do when we get back?" Draco glanced at her. If we get back, you mean? She shot him a sharp look, but he smiled faintly. All right. When we get back, I imagine I'll do something incredibly dull. Try to make up for everything my family's done. Maybe rebuild the manor's east wing. It's still half in ruins from the war. Hermione tilted her head. That doesn't sound dull to me. No? No. It sounds like starting over. He stared at the fire for a long time before replying. And you? What will you do? I don't know, she said honestly. I thought I did once. I thought knowledge was the answer to everything. But now, she trailed off, watching the flames dance. Now, I'm not sure. Maybe some things aren't meant to be understood, only accepted. Draco's gaze lingered on her profile, the firelight casting gold across her skin. That's not the Hermione Granger I remember. She smiled faintly. Maybe not, but time changes people, doesn't it? He looked down at his hands. Yes, he said quietly. It does. The next day brought a fragile calm. Snow began to fall in soft drifts, blanketing the castle grounds in silence. Hermione and Draco worked side by side in their borrowed quarters, tracing runes across the floor, recreating the symbols she had deciphered from the old text. These markings, she said, pointing to a spiraling sigil, are meant to identify temporal residue. If we cast the spell at the right frequency, it should reveal the point where the fabric of time is weakest, our anchor. Draco frowned. And if we cast it wrong? Hermione hesitated. Then the castle could collapse inward on itself. He blinked. You're joking. She wasn't. All right, he said finally, rolling up his sleeves. Then we'd better not get it wrong. They began the incantation together, their voices low and steady. The air thickened with energy, the runes glowing faintly beneath their feet. A deep vibration rippled through the room, not violent, but ancient, like the slow turning of unseen gears. Then, with a shimmer of light, something appeared in the center of the circle, a faint image, almost like a reflection in water. It was the time chamber, the same one from the Department of Mysteries. Hermione could see it clearly, the shattered temporal lens still lying amid the wreckage, frozen mid-explosion. That's it, she breathed. That's our tether. But as she stepped closer, the image flickered, and for a moment, another figure appeared within the vision. A man standing in the ruins, studying the device. His face was obscured by shadows, but Hermione's heart lurched all the same. Riddle. He had found the same echo. Draco swore softly. He's seen it too. He knows it exists. Hermione's mind raced. He's trying to use it. If he manages to connect to the anchor before we do, then he could follow us forward. Draco finished grimly. Bring himself into our time. Panic surged in her chest. We can't let that happen. They dissolved the spell at once, the runes fading into ash. Hermione paced the room, her thoughts a storm. He must have sensed the disturbance we caused when we arrived. He's been tracking it, trying to replicate it. Draco's voice was low but steady. Then we'll have to move faster. If we can complete the restoration ritual before he stabilizes his end, we might cut the tether entirely. She nodded. I'll need to rework the equations, strengthen the return spell. We'll have one chance. One's enough, he said simply. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in silence. But neither of them slept that night. They worked through the dark hours, the glow of their wands flickering across parchment and ink. As dawn began to break, Draco leaned back, exhaustion shadowing his face. "You realize," he said softly, "that if we succeed, none of this will remain. The people here, the memories, they'll all fade, even us." Hermione met his gaze. "It doesn't matter. This isn't our world." But her voice wavered on the last word, and she saw the flicker of pain that crossed his features, brief, unguarded. He reached across the table then, his hand brushing hers, not by accident, but deliberately. The touch was warm, grounding. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but right now it feels real enough." For a moment, the tension between them softened, replaced by something fragile and undeniable. Hermione didn't pull away. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the room, turning the ash of the runes to gold. Somewhere far below, the castle stirred to life. But in that small room, time seemed to stand still. Two misplaced souls bound by the same fragile thread, caught between what was and what might be. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew. Before the end came, one of them might have to break that thread to save the other. For now, they only worked, side by side, as the snow kept falling and time's shadow grew ever shorter. The days that followed were wrapped in a hush of snow and secrets. The castle's ancient walls seemed to listen, as though aware of the threads of time tightening within them. Hermione and Draco moved carefully through its corridors, the weight of their discovery heavy between them. Every glance, every whisper felt watched. Tom Riddle had grown more attentive, not overtly, but in the way shadows shift when the light moves. He appeared often now in the library at mealtimes, in the corridors between classes, always with that same perfect smile, always with eyes that saw too much. Once, as Hermione passed him on the staircase, his voice drifted softly behind her. "You carry yourself as one who has seen much of the world, Miss Delacour, yet I find myself wondering how much of it has seen you." She did not turn, did not answer, but his words followed her all the way to her chambers. It was then she began to understand that their time was running out, not just in the sense of the spell, but in the way a snare draws closed. Riddle's curiosity was no longer academic. He had sensed power, and power was something Tom Riddle never left unclaimed. Hermione and Draco worked in secret whenever they could. Their small room in the upper tower had become a sanctuary, a place filled with ink-stained parchment, softly glowing runes, and the faint hum of magic being rebuilt. The ritual they planned was dangerous, more so than either wanted to admit. It required a convergence of the same energy that had brought them here, a merging of two souls' magical signatures to reopen the temporal fold. "It's not stable," Draco muttered one evening, examining the parchment where Hermione had written the spell's core runes. "If the power surges before the sequence locks, one of us could—" "Be lost," Hermione finished. She met his eyes. "I know." He looked away, jaw tightening. "Then you should be the one to cast it. You're better with temporal magic." "No." Hermione shook her head firmly. "We're doing this together. The spell needs balance, intention and control. Alone, it'll break." Draco exhaled through his nose. "You always were stubborn." She gave a faint smile. "You're one to talk." For a moment, their eyes met across the flickering lamplight, and something unspoken passed between them. Not the sharp friction of old rivalry, but a quieter understanding born of shared danger. That night, Hermione woke to the sound of the wind howling outside and found Draco still awake, sitting near the window. His wand cast a pale glow, illuminating his face in silver and shadow. "You should sleep," she whispered. He didn't turn. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Riddle. He's too calm. He knows something's coming." Hermione joined him by the window. The sky outside was streaked with the first glimmer of dawn. "Dumbledore suspects too," she said softly. "He hasn't said anything directly, but I think he knows we're not who we pretend to be." "Then why hasn't he exposed us?" Draco asked. "Maybe he's waiting to see what we'll do." Draco gave a humorless laugh. "Typical. Always the observer." Hermione smiled faintly, but her gaze stayed on the horizon. "He trusts us. Somehow, he does." They stood in silence for a long time, watching the light creep over the snow. It was strange, Hermione thought, how peace could exist in moments like this, even with danger circling so close. Later that day, they went to see Dumbledore again under the pretense of continuing their research. The professor greeted them with that same serene warmth, though his eyes, piercing blue and impossibly knowing, seemed to weigh every word they spoke. "I've been thinking about your studies," he said thoughtfully, pouring tea for them both. "You speak often of balance, of time as something to be restored, not conquered. A rare perspective for scholars so young." Hermione inclined her head. "We've seen what happens when magic is used without restraint." Dumbledore's gaze lingered on her, and she had the strange sensation that he could see through every layer of her disguise, through the false name, the borrowed time, even into the years that hadn't yet happened. "Then you have already learned what most wizards never do," he said softly, "that every spell has a cost, and the wise seek not to escape it, but to understand it." He paused, then smiled faintly. "If I may offer advice, beware of those who seek to master time. They are often mastered by it instead." Hermione nodded slowly, her throat tight. When they left his office, Draco glanced at her. "He knows." "Yes," she whispered, "but he'll help us, in his own way." As they made their way down the staircase, they nearly collided with Riddle himself. His expression was mild, almost friendly, but Hermione saw the calculation in his eyes. "Ah, Miss Delacour, Monsieur Aurélien," he greeted smoothly. "Consulting with Professor Dumbledore again. You must find his philosophies fascinating." Hermione forced a smile. "He's a remarkable wizard." "Oh, indeed," Riddle said, his tone silken. "Though I sometimes wonder if wisdom is just another word for fear. Tell me, do you believe the laws of time are meant to protect us or to keep us weak?" Draco's voice was cool. "Perhaps they exist to keep people like you from breaking them." Riddle's smile didn't falter, but his eyes darkened. "An interesting opinion." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You speak as though you've seen the consequences of such things firsthand." Hermione's pulse quickened. "All theory, Mr. Riddle. Nothing more." He studied her face for a long moment, long enough that the silence felt like a spell of its own, then nodded slightly. "Of course." When he walked away, Draco's shoulders remained tense until the sound of his footsteps vanished. "We can't stay here any longer," he said. "He's too close." "I know," Hermione whispered. "Tonight. We'll finish the ritual tonight." They prepared as darkness fell, drawing the runes in chalk upon the floor. The circle glowed faintly in hues of gold and blue. time and memory intertwined. Outside, the snow had stopped and the air was still. "Once the spell begins, it'll draw energy from both of us," Hermione said quietly. "We have to stay connected, no matter what happens." Draco nodded. "I'll be right here." They stood together at the center of the circle, wands raised. The chant began softly, growing with each repetition. The magic gathered around them like a living thing, a pulse, a heartbeat that resonated through the stones. The runes flared, light spiraling upward in ribbons of gold. But as the energy peaked, a door slammed open. Riddle stood at the threshold, his wand already raised, eyes blazing. "I knew it," he hissed. "You don't belong here." The spell shuddered. Hermione's concentration wavered, the circle trembling dangerously. Draco moved instinctively, stepping between her and Riddle. "Stay back," he warned. Riddle's lips curved in a cold smile. "You think you can command me? You're playing with forces you don't understand." Hermione's voice cut through the chaos. "You don't understand them either, Tom. And if you don't stop—" But before she could finish, Riddle's spell struck. Draco deflected it, the collision of their magic shaking the room. Sparks flew, the runes flickered, and the circle collapsed. A blinding light erupted, swallowing everything in its path. Hermione felt herself falling, through air, through time, through the weight of magic unbound. She reached for Draco, felt his hand brush hers for an instant, and then darkness claimed them both. When she opened her eyes, the world was still again. The runes were gone. The tower was silent. But Draco was nowhere to be seen. Her heart froze. And somewhere, faintly, she thought she heard Riddle's laughter, echoing from a place beyond time. Hermione awoke to silence. The world around her was pale and distorted, as though she were caught inside a half-remembered dream. The floor beneath her was cold stone, the kind worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Her vision blurred, colors bleeding together before finally settling into focus. She was still in Hogwarts, or what remained of it. The chamber that had held their ritual circle was cracked and dark, the air thick with magic that smelled of iron and smoke. The runes on the floor had burned away to black scars. The window was shattered, snow drifting through the broken frame in thin, ghostly ribbons. "Draco!" she called hoarsely. Her voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast emptiness. No answer, only the whisper of the wind. Panic clawed its way up her throat. She scrambled to her feet, her legs trembling. "Draco!" Still nothing. She turned in circles, scanning the room, but there was no trace of him. No broken wand, no fallen cloak, not even footprints in the thin layer of ash that coated the floor. It was as if time itself had swallowed him whole. For a moment, Hermione stood frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. Then she drew a steadying breath and forced herself to think. The spell had ruptured mid-cast. That meant the magic hadn't fully anchored. If Draco had been caught in the backlash— "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. He has to be here." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. He wasn't. Hermione pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I'll find you," she murmured into the cold air. "I swear it." Outside, the snow fell thicker now, blanketing the grounds in white. The castle, too, seemed changed, older, quieter. As she made her way through the halls, Hermione realized something was off. The paintings were different. Some of the portraits she remembered were missing, replaced by others she had never seen. Even the architecture seemed subtly altered, staircases meeting in strange angles, corridors stretching too far. Her heart sank. She hadn't returned to her own time. She'd gone further back. It must have been the backlash of the spell. Riddle's interference had thrown her off course. But how far? Hermione's steps echoed softly as she made her way toward the library. It was instinct that led her there. In times of confusion, the library had always been her sanctuary. She pushed open the great doors, and the scent of parchment and dust greeted her like an old friend. The candles were burning low, and in the far corner, a single figure moved between the shelves, tall, robed, with a mane of auburn hair touched by silver. Her breath caught. "Professor Dumbledore," she whispered. He turned, and the familiar blue eyes met hers, younger, yet still carrying that same infinite calm. "Ah," he said softly, "so you've found your way back, though I suspect not quite where you intended." Hermione stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. You know?" "Of course," he said, a faint smile curving his lips. "When one tampers with time, the ripples rarely go unnoticed. You carry its residue still. The magic clings to you like starlight." Her throat tightened. Draco. He was with me. The spell collapsed. I don't know where he's gone." Dumbledore's gaze softened. "I fear the fracture separated you. Time seldom releases its hold evenly. He may have been drawn to another point along the current." Hermione felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Then I have to find him. There must be a way." "There is always a way," Dumbledore said gently, "though not always the one we hope for." He guided her to a chair and poured a small cup of tea from a floating pot, the same conjuring charm she remembered from years later. "Tell me," he said, "how did this all begin?" Hermione told him everything. The temporal lens, the experiment gone wrong, Draco's unexpected arrival, their encounters with Riddle, and the desperate ritual that had sent them hurtling through time once more. Dumbledore listened without interruption, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Fascinating and troubling. Tom's curiosity, I see, has already begun to devour him. I had hoped for more time before he stumbled upon such knowledge." Hermione swallowed. "He's dangerous, even now." "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly, "but even danger must be understood before it can be undone. As for your young companion, I cannot sense his presence in this time. That suggests he may have gone forward, not back." "Forward?" Hermione's heart leapt. Then maybe he's back where we started." "Perhaps," Dumbledore said, though his tone was thoughtful rather than certain. "But time is not a straight road, Miss Granger. It winds and folds, and sometimes to go forward, one must first go back." Hermione met his gaze. "Then how do I find him?" Dumbledore rose and crossed to an old wooden cabinet. From within, he drew a small hourglass, delicate and glimmering faintly with silver sand. "This," he said, holding it out to her, "is one of the earliest time-turners ever crafted. Its magic is imperfect, volatile, but with your knowledge, you may be able to anchor it to your own spell's residue." Hermione accepted it with trembling hands. "You're giving this to me?" "I am lending it to you," he corrected kindly, "with the hope that you'll return it in good condition, and perhaps with both of you intact." She smiled weakly. "I'll do my best." He inclined his head. "I expect nothing less." That night, Hermione prepared in silence. The old time-turner lay in her palm, its sands pulsing faintly with light. She could feel the echo of her own magic resonating within it, the same frequency that had tied her and Draco together. If she could trace it, perhaps she could follow the thread that bound them still. She stood by the window, the snow still falling outside, and whispered into the darkness, "Wait for me, Draco." Then she turned the hourglass. Once, twice, thrice. The world twisted. Light flared around her, and the air filled with the sound of rushing water, of voices whispering backward and forward at once. For a moment, she thought she saw him. Draco, reaching out through the veil of time, his expression fierce and desperate. And then everything went white. When the world steadied again, Hermione found herself in a forest. The ground was soft with pine needles, the air thick with mist. Somewhere nearby, the distant towers of Hogwarts rose against a storm-grey sky. And there, half buried in the snow, was a wand she recognized instantly. Slender hawthorn wood, with a faint silver band near the hilt. Her breath caught. She knelt, fingers trembling as she picked it up. The magic that thrummed through it was unmistakable. "Draco," she whispered. But before she could take another step, a voice spoke behind her. Low, cold, familiar. "Looking for someone, Miss Granger." Hermione turned, and her heart nearly stopped. Tom Riddle stood there, his robes immaculate, his eyes bright as obsidian. But there was something new in them now, something triumphant. He held a second wand loosely in his hand, Draco's. Riddle smiled. "I believe we've both lost something. Shall we see which of us finds it first?" The forest fell silent, save for the faint whisper of falling snow, and Hermione knew the game of time was far from over. The forest was a cathedral of silence. Snow lay deep upon the roots of the ancient trees, and the air shimmered faintly with magic. Hermione's wand hand trembled as she faced Tom Riddle, though her eyes held steady. He looked as though he'd stepped from a portrait, elegant, composed, every movement deliberate. Only the faint curl of his mouth betrayed the hunger beneath. "Where is he?" she demanded. Riddle tilted his head, as if considering whether to answer. "Your companion? The one who appeared from nowhere with you? He's elsewhere. Time can be cruel that way." Hermione's grip tightened on her wand. "You've done something to him." "Not yet," Riddle said softly, and smiled. "But I am curious. You came here through magic beyond even the comprehension of the Ministry. You wield knowledge that should not exist. That fascinates me." "I don't owe you explanations," she said coldly. "Oh, I think you do." He took a step closer, the snow crunching softly beneath his shoes. "Because whether you realize it or not, you've brought something into this era that doesn't belong. The magic clinging to you. It bends the air around you. It sings to me." Hermione's pulse raced. "You can feel the temporal residue." "Of course," he said, his voice almost reverent. "It's ancient, pure, power that transcends boundaries. You can touch time itself. Imagine what could be done with such a gift." "You'd destroy everything with it," she whispered. His smile deepened. "Perhaps, but destruction is simply another form of creation, don't you think?" Hermione's mind worked furiously. She had to stall him, buy time, perhaps even sense where Draco had gone. The wand Riddle held glowed faintly in his grasp, its silver band glinting beneath the snow-filtered light. "Why take his wand?" she asked. "To study it," Riddle said simply. "Its enchantments are unfamiliar. The craftsmanship, it speaks of a future craft I've never seen, and the magic within it, strong but restless. It doesn't belong here." He turned it slowly between his fingers, then glanced up at her. "Neither do you." Hermione's breath came fast, fogging in the cold. "Then send me back." "Ah," he murmured, stepping closer still. "That's the tragedy, isn't it? You can't return without the same energy that brought you here. And now that I've felt it, I doubt I can let you go. You and I could do extraordinary things together." His words were silk over steel. Hermione's heart pounded, but her mind remained sharp. "You don't understand what you're playing with, Tom. The kind of magic I used, it doesn't belong to any one person. It's alive, and it punishes those who twist it for their own gain." He laughed, soft and low. "You sound like Dumbledore." Hermione's expression hardened. "Then perhaps you should start listening to him." Riddle's amusement faded. The warmth in his eyes drained away, replaced by cold fury. "Dumbledore is a fool. He hides behind ideals because he fears what he could become. I don't fear what I am." "Not yet," Hermione said quietly. Lightning fast, his wand rose. She barely managed to deflect the first curse, the blast of energy exploding against a nearby tree, splintering bark and ice. She darted sideways, sending a stunning spell that shattered the snow at his feet. He laughed again, sharp, cruel, and returned fire. The forest erupted into chaos. Spells flared between the trees, blue and gold light tearing through the winter gloom. Hermione moved instinctively, years of battle sharpening her reflexes. But Riddle was faster than any opponent she'd faced in years. Graceful, precise, his magic refined yet merciless. A curse struck the ground near her, flinging her backward. She rolled, gasping, and raised her wand again, only to see him already standing over her, eyes glowing faintly with the thrill of power. "Remarkable," he said softly. "You fight like someone who's seen war." Hermione's voice shook, but her resolve did not. "I have." He tilted his head. "Then you know what happens to those who lose." The tip of his wand flared red, but before he could strike, a sharp crack split the air. From the edge of the clearing came a shout. "Expelliarmus!" The spell hit Riddle squarely in the chest. His wand flew from his hand, and he staggered backward, fury flashing in his eyes. Hermione turned toward the sound, her heart nearly stopping. Draco stood there, pale as snow, his cloak torn, his eyes blazing. "Get away from her!" he snarled. Riddle's smile returned, thin and venomous. "Ah, the lost companion. How touching." Hermione's relief warred with dread. "Draco, be careful." But he was already moving, his wand slicing through the air. The forest filled with blinding light as spell met spell. Riddle's face was lit with exhilaration. He hadn't faced a challenge like this before. The force of their duel shook the trees, snow cascading like shattered glass. Hermione scrambled to her feet, joining in the fight. Together they forced Riddle backward, each spell driving him closer toward the frozen ravine at the forest's edge. For a moment, victory seemed within reach, until Riddle flicked his hand and the wand Draco had lost vanished from his grasp, reappearing in Riddle's. "2 wands," Riddle said softly. "Twice the power." The ground trembled as energy burst from his fingertips. The blast hit the snow, erupting into a storm of light and sound. Hermione and Draco were thrown apart, crashing into the icy ground. When the glare faded, Riddle was gone. Only silence remained. Silence, and the faint echo of laughter fading through the trees. Hermione pushed herself up, her limbs shaking. "Draco!" He coughed, sitting up a few feet away, streaked with frost but alive. "I hate him," he muttered. Hermione let out a shaky laugh of relief. "You and half the wizarding world." She crawled to him, helping him to his feet. Their hands lingered longer than they needed to, their eyes meeting in the quiet aftermath. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I've been better." His tones softened. "But I've been worse too." Hermione smiled faintly. "You saved me." "Don't sound so surprised," he said, brushing snow from his cloak. "I'm not in the habit of letting people He stopped abruptly, his expression unreadable. "People I owe die." Her heart gave a painful twist, but she said nothing. Instead, she glanced at the twin wands now lying abandoned in the snow. "He took your wand. He's trying to use it to open the tether again." "Then we'll stop him," Draco said simply. "Whatever it takes." They stood together in the falling snow, the cold air biting but alive with purpose. Far in the distance, the dark outline of Hogwarts loomed, its towers veiled in mist. Somewhere within those ancient walls, Tom Riddle was already working to twist time itself into a weapon. Hermione tightened her grip on her wand. "We end this tonight." Draco nodded, his breath ghosting in the air. "Together." As they turned toward the castle, the snow began to fall heavier, blanketing the path behind them. The forest closed around their footprints like a secret keeping its promise. The hourglass she carried beneath her robes pulsed faintly with light, the sands shifting, counting down to something unseen. Time, it seemed, was giving them one last chance. The castle loomed ahead of them, shrouded in mist and moonlight. Its towers pierced the sky like the spires of an ancient cathedral, their windows glowing faintly with firelight. The snow had slowed to a whispering fall, delicate flakes drifting in the stillness. Yet beneath that quiet beauty, something darker stirred. Hermione and Draco moved swiftly through the lower courtyards, their footsteps silent, cloaks drawn close. The warmth of the castle called to them, but neither felt comfort. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner holding the possibility of Riddle's watchful eyes. They entered through the side entrance near the greenhouses, avoiding the main gates. The familiar scent of damp earth and cold stone filled Hermione's senses. The castle seemed older now, heavier somehow, as if aware of the storm brewing within its walls. "He's in the chamber," Draco said quietly as they crossed the narrow passage. Hermione turned to him, startled. "You can feel it?" He nodded. "The connection between our wands, it's still there. When he used mine, something linked us. I can sense him faintly. Anger, hunger, it's like a pulse." Hermione swallowed. The Chamber of Secrets. Of course. He'd go somewhere hidden, somewhere ancient. The chamber's magic would amplify his ritual. Draco's jaw tightened. "Then that's where we'll find him." They descended through the winding corridors, past the dungeons, and into the depths of the castle, where the torches burned blue and the air grew colder. The walls seemed to hum faintly, whispering spells too old for words. Hermione's heart pounded. Every step felt heavier, every breath drawn slower. They reached the entrance. a stone wall carved with serpentine patterns. "Open!" Draco hissed, speaking in parcel tongue. The wall groaned, shifting apart. The air that greeted them was thick with ancient magic and the faint, coppery tang of the serpent's lair. They stepped inside, wands raised, light flickering off the damp stone. The chamber stretched before them like a cathedral of shadows. The colossal statue of Salazar Slytherin loomed at the far end, its stone eyes glinting with reflected torchlight. The air was alive with a low vibration, a hum of power that prickled along Hermione's skin. And there, at the foot of the statue, stood Tom Riddle. He turned as they entered, his face illuminated by the pale green glow of the ritual circle etched into the floor. Symbols pulsed faintly beneath his feet, drawn in silver fire. In one hand, he held his wand, in the other, Draco's. "Ah," Riddle said softly. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." Draco raised his wand. "You've gone too far." "Have I?" Riddle's smile was almost serene. "I only seek to understand what you've hidden from me. This magic, the power to walk through time itself. You stand in front of a miracle, and you call it madness." "It's not a miracle," Hermione said, stepping forward. "It's a wound. Every time it's opened, it bleeds." Riddle's eyes gleamed with fascination. "You speak as though you've seen its heart." "Tell me, Miss Granger. Yes, I know who you are now. Did time show you its secrets? Did it whisper the truth of power to you?" Hermione froze, but Draco's wand didn't waver. "How long have you known?" Riddle laughed softly. "Since the night I first saw you. Your magic smells of years yet unlived. You are both ghosts of a world I have not yet conquered." "Then you understand nothing," Hermione said fiercely. "If you tear time apart, you destroy your own future. You'll destroy everything." Riddle's expression shifted, pity, perhaps, or curiosity. "The future is not a place, Miss Granger. It is clay, and I intend to shape it." He raised both wands, and the air ignited. The symbols flared brighter, the hum deepening into a roar. A vortex of energy swirled above the circle, tearing the air apart with blinding light. Hermione felt the pull immediately, a drag deep in her chest, like the world itself was trying to unravel her from within. She staggered, clutching the hourglass beneath her cloak. Its sands glowed violently, spinning of their own accord. Draco's voice broke through the chaos. "He's trying to open the tether. He'll rip through time itself." Hermione gritted her teeth. "We have to stop him before it stabilizes." She raised her wand, shouting a counter-curse, but the power in the chamber twisted it aside. Riddle's laughter filled the air. "You can't stop me. You don't belong here. None of this belongs here." Draco moved faster than thought. He lunged toward Riddle, his hand grasping for his wand. For a split second, the two men were locked, light against shadow, the air crackling with force. Hermione felt the hourglass thrum against her palm, resonating with the chaos. The tether between them all was breaking apart. "Draco, get out of the circle," she shouted. "No," he yelled back. "Not without you." "Do it!" she screamed, and with a flick of her wand, she hurled him backward out of the ring of fire. The chamber roared, the ground splitting beneath her feet. Riddle's spell flared one last time, and then she was at the center of it, the light swallowing everything. Hermione felt herself suspended in nothing. There was no sound, no ground, no air, just the rush of time, centuries passing in a heartbeat, stars blooming and dying around her. Then a voice, faint, familiar. Hermione! Her eyes snapped open. Draco's face hovered above hers, pale and blurred. They were lying on stone again, but not the chamber. The floor beneath them was smooth, clean, polished by years of footsteps. It took her a moment to realize where they were. The Department of Mysteries, the time chamber. The temporal lens, once shattered, now stood whole again in the center of the room. Its golden ring pulsed gently, as though breathing. Hermione's heart raced. "We're back." Draco pushed himself up beside her, wincing. "Merlin's beard. Did it actually work?" She looked around, her voice trembling. "I think so." But something was wrong. The air shimmered faintly, as though reality hadn't yet settled. The hourglass still glowed in her hand, its sands frozen mid-turn. Draco frowned. "Riddle." "Gone," Hermione said softly. "Or trapped, somewhere in the fold." The magic collapsed before he could escape. Draco exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Good riddance." They sat in silence for a long moment. The hum of the temporal lens was steady, gentle, like a heartbeat restored. Outside, somewhere above them, life in the Ministry went on, unaware that time itself had nearly been undone. Finally, Hermione turned to him. "You saved me." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." He looked at her, and for a moment there was nothing in his gaze but quiet warmth. "So, what happens now?" Hermione glanced down at the hourglass. The sands shimmered, then stilled. "Now," she said softly, "we live. Properly this time." He nodded. "Together?" Her answer came with a small, steady smile. "Yes, together." And as they stood amid the quiet hum of restored time, the faint shimmer of magic around them faded, leaving only two souls who had defied history itself, bound not by time, but by choice. Far away, deep beneath Hogwarts, the Chamber of Secrets lay silent once more. Yet on the stone floor where the ritual had burned its mark, one symbol still glowed faintly. A serpent encircling an hourglass, its tail biting its own curve. A reminder that even when time heals, it never forgets. The world after their return felt quieter, though the silence carried a strange weight. The Ministry bustled as it always had, paperwork fluttering, quills scratching, memos darting through the air. But for Hermione and Draco, time itself seemed to breathe differently. Every tick of the clock felt heavier, slower, as though the universe were waiting to see if they would truly stay. Hermione spent her first days back re-establishing her life in the Department of Mysteries. To her relief, no one seemed to remember the disaster with the temporal lens. Reports showed no record of a malfunction, no mention of an explosion. It was as if the event had been rewritten, quietly erased from history. Yet when she entered the time chamber again, the air still felt faintly charged, like a room that had once held lightning. She stood before the restored lens, tracing its edge with her fingertips. It pulsed faintly, a steady rhythm that mirrored her own heartbeat. She wondered if it remembered her. "Still haunting the past, Granger." The voice came softly from behind her, familiar and achingly real. She turned, and there he was, Draco, leaning casually against the doorway, arms folded, an almost smile curving his mouth. "Old habits die hard," she said. "And you? I thought you swore you were done with Ministry corridors." "I did," he said with a shrug. "But after saving the timeline, I figured I'd earned a few privileges." She arched an eyebrow. "You mean you came to check that I hadn't blown it up again?" "That too," he admitted. His expression softened as he looked around the chamber. "Hard to believe we were gone at all, isn't it?" Hermione hesitated. "Sometimes it feels like a dream. But then I remember—" He met her gaze. "You remember him?" She nodded slowly. "Riddle, the past, everything." Draco's eyes darkened, the memory of that confrontation flickering behind them. "You think he's truly gone?" "I think," Hermione said carefully, "that the magic took him somewhere he can't hurt anyone. For now." Draco frowned. "For now?" "Time doesn't destroy," she murmured. "It hides. And one day what's hidden finds a way back." He was silent for a moment. Then, lightly, "You always did have a talent for optimism." Hermione smiled faintly. "And you for sarcasm." Their laughter broke the tension, brief and quiet. Yet as they stood together in that chamber of paradox and memory, a shared understanding hung between them, fragile but undeniable. In the weeks that followed, they settled into something almost ordinary. Hermione returned to her work, though her focus shifted. No longer was she obsessed with controlling time. Instead, she devoted herself to understanding it, the boundaries that must never be crossed, the balance it demanded. Her new research was cautious, reverent even. Draco, meanwhile, took up a position as a consultant for magical artifacts, partly at Hermione's urging, partly because he no longer trusted the safety of such things in anyone else's hands. His arrogance had dimmed, tempered by what they'd endured. He carried himself with the same poise, but his eyes were different now, less guarded, more human. Sometimes he'd stop by Hermione's office under the pretense of checking her calculations. Other times, they'd find themselves at the same cafe near the ministry, quietly sharing tea while pretending not to notice that their hands brushed when they reached for the sugar. It wasn't the kind of love story that burned. It was one that unfolded quietly, like dawn seeping over the horizon. One evening, as winter gave way to spring, they met again in the time chamber. Hermione had been reviewing readings from the temporal lens when Draco entered, holding a small box. "What's this?" she asked, curious. He opened it to reveal a pendant, delicate, shaped like an hourglass. Inside, silver sand shimmered faintly. "I found it in the ruins of the old Malfoy library," he said. "It belonged to my grandfather, apparently. I thought you might like it." Hermione stared at it, her throat tightening. "It's beautiful." He hesitated. "It's not enchanted. Not really. But it felt fitting." She reached out, taking it gently. "Thank you." Draco gave a small, almost awkward smile. "Consider it a reminder that we survived." Hermione looked down at the pendant, the sands glimmering like captured starlight. "And that time, for all its cruelty, gave us something worth keeping." He nodded, his voice low. "Exactly." They stood together in silence, surrounded by the faint hum of the lens. The air between them shimmered, not with magic, but with something deeper, quieter. Finally, Hermione broke the stillness. "You know," she said softly, "when I was trapped back there, when I thought I'd lost you, I kept thinking about how time isn't just measured in minutes or centuries. It's measured in moments. And I promised myself that if I ever got another one with you, I wouldn't waste it." Draco's eyes met hers, the light in them softer than she'd ever seen. "Then don't." And in that instant, the walls of the ministry, the hum of the lens, even the weight of the centuries fell away. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. The gesture was small, almost hesitant, but it carried more truth than any spell could conjure. their fingers intertwined. Hermione smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've spent so long fighting time. Maybe it's time we learned to live in it." Draco gave a quiet laugh. "For once, Granger, I couldn't agree more." Outside the chamber, the world moved on, oblivious to the two people who had rewritten its history. The Ministry bustled, the city beyond it breathed, and the stars shifted imperceptibly in their courses. Yet deep within the Department of Mysteries, the golden ring of the temporal lens pulsed faintly, as though remembering them. In the years that followed, stories began to circulate among the unspeakables. Whispers of two researchers who had once vanished without a trace, only to return days later with no explanation. Some claimed the lens had chosen them. Others believed it had nearly destroyed them. But those who knew Hermione and Draco best noticed something different. A quiet understanding between them, a shared glance that spoke of things too vast to name. And on nights when the world slept and the moonlight touched the glass of the time chamber, two shadows could sometimes be seen standing side by side before the golden ring, their reflections shimmering as one. Time, it seemed, had forgiven them. Or perhaps, at last, it had simply let them be. Far below, deep in the earth where forgotten chambers slept, a single rune still glowed faintly on the stone. A serpent encircling an hourglass, its eyes dim but unextinguished. The magic of it whispered through the centuries, a promise and a warning both. Because though time may mend and lovers may heal, it never forgets those who dared to steal a moment from its grasp. The years that followed were kind to them, though time, ever watchful, never ceased its quiet hum in the background of their lives. Hermione had returned to her work at the Department of Mysteries, but her research had changed in spirit. No longer did she seek to pierce the veil of time or harness its secrets. She studied it as one studies a living being. Respectful, cautious, aware of its moods. Draco, meanwhile, divided his time between the Ministry and the quiet restoration of Malfoy Manor. The great house, long a monument to old arrogance, began to transform. The shadows of its past lightened, its long halls no longer whispered with bitterness. The once dark portraits seemed to soften in their frames, and even the elves who had learned fear over generations began to hum again as they worked. Sometimes Hermione visited him there. She would arrive with parchment tucked under her arm, intending to show him some new discovery, though the evenings rarely ended in discussion of research. They would walk the gardens that had once been scorched by curses, now thick with wildflowers, and talk instead of quiet things, the small human joys they had forgotten to notice in the years before. One spring afternoon, they stood together at the edge of the orchard. The air was heavy with the scent of blossoms, and bees moved lazily through the light. Hermione brushed her fingers along the bark of a newly planted tree. "I never imagined this place could feel peaceful," she said. Draco smiled faintly. "Neither did I. My mother once told me that every home carries the weight of those who've lived in it. Perhaps we've just shifted that weight a little." Hermione turned to him. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't returned? If we'd stayed in the past?" He looked out across the field where the sun burned low over the hills. "Sometimes, but I think the past had already taken enough from us." She nodded, though part of her still wandered. The memory of Tom Riddle's face, frozen in that final moment before the ritual collapsed, still haunted her dreams. She often woke in the small hours with the echo of his voice whispering through her thoughts. The future is clay. Dumbledore's warning had proven true. Time never destroyed. It hid, and what it hid, it remembered. Yet Draco's presence beside her was grounding. Whenever the weight of those memories became too heavy, he had a way of pulling her back to the present. "Granger," he said suddenly, a touch of mischief in his tone. "You've got that look again, the one that says you're about to try to rewrite the universe." She laughed softly. "Old habits. Best to let them die, don't you think?" "Maybe." She tilted her head, teasing. "Though you never seemed to mind when I was saving your life with those habits." He smirked. "You've got me there." Their laughter carried through the orchard, light and unburdened. For a time, it seemed the darkness that had shadowed their lives had finally lifted. But the peace they'd built was delicate, and both knew it. That winter, rumors began to spread within the ministry. Whispers of odd magical fluctuations rippling through the Department of Mysteries, equipment malfunctioning, hourglasses shattering for no reason. Hermione heard it first from one of her colleagues, a nervous young unspeakable who met her in the corridor late one evening. "Something's wrong with the temporal wing," he said, lowering his voice. "The lens, it's humming again." Hermione's blood ran cold. That night, she returned to a time chamber alone. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the lens at its center. It pulsed gently, gold and blue, the rhythm almost like a heartbeat. For a moment, she simply stood there, listening. "Not again," she whispered. But the lens seemed to respond to her voice. Its glow brightened, and for an instant, she saw something shimmer across its surface, a reflection that wasn't her own. A dark figure, Tom Riddle's eyes cold and knowing. Hermione staggered back, the echo of his laughter ringing in her mind. But as quickly as it had appeared, the vision faded. The lens returned to its usual stillness. She stayed in the chamber until dawn, running every diagnostic spell she knew, searching for flaws in the magic. There were none. Whatever she had seen had not been a malfunction. When she told Draco the next morning, he went very still. "He's gone," he said, as if repeating it could make it true. "You said the spell collapsed. He couldn't have survived." Hermione's fingers tightened around the pendant he'd given her, the little hourglass that hung now against her collarbone. Magic that powerful doesn't just disappear. It changes shape. It waits. Draco frowned. "Then what do we do?" "We make sure it has nowhere to grow," she said firmly. "We seal the lens, permanently." Together, they worked for days in secret. Hermione crafted a series of containment wards, layering them with precision. Draco reinforced them with old family sigils, their strength drawn from generations of enchantments. The process was exhausting, but when it was done, the time chamber fell silent once more. The lens dimmed to a soft, steady glow, its hum fading to nothing. "Will it hold?" Draco asked. Hermione looked at the runes circling the floor, their light fading into stillness. "It has to." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "You've been carrying this alone since the day we came back. You don't have to anymore." She met his gaze, and something inside her eased. "I know." They stood together in that room of echoes and history, until the last flicker of magic disappeared. When they left, Hermione sealed the doors behind them with a quiet flick of her wand. For the first time, she didn't feel the urge to look back. That night, snow fell again, the first of the season. They stood on the balcony of the manor, watching it drift over the fields. The world was silent, except for the faint crackle of the fire behind them. Hermione leaned against the railing, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "Do you think it's really over this time?" Draco stepped beside her. "I think time finally decided to stop playing with us." She smiled faintly. "Or it's giving us another chance. Then let's not waste it." He reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, warm against the winter chill. For a long while, they said nothing. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, blanketing the scars of the past beneath a layer of white. Inside the sealed time chamber, far below the ministry, the golden lens rested in perfect stillness. But deep within its core, a single spark of silver light pulsed once, faint and quick, like the echo of a heartbeat. And then it was gone. The sands of time were quiet once more, at least for now. Spring returned to England like a long-forgotten promise. The snow that had blanketed the hills melted into rivers that shimmered under the warming sun, and the fields around Malfoy Manor were alive once more with colour. Every morning, mist rose from the grass, and the scent of wild thyme and dew filled the air. Hermione had never thought the manor could be beautiful. Yet now, with ivy climbing its once bleak walls and the gardens bright with flowers, it felt almost redeemed, like something broken that had finally decided to heal. She spent her days quietly, dividing her time between her research at the ministry and the growing library Draco had built within the east wing of the estate. It was filled with rare volumes, tomes rescued from the war, ancient texts restored from decay. But the shelves also held new books, gifts from Hermione, annotated and well-loved. It was a sanctuary of learning and peace, a place where the weight of history seemed to lessen. One afternoon, as rain pattered softly against the tall windows, Hermione sat at the long oak table, sorting through a collection of letters from the Department of Mysteries. Draco entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. His steps were light, unhurried, so unlike the boy he had once been. "Still working?" he asked, setting 1 cup beside her. "Always," she replied with a small smile. "But not on time magic. Don't worry." He chuckled, settling across from her. "Good. I've had enough of time unraveling to last a lifetime." Hermione glanced up at him, her expression softening. "You've changed, you know." "Have I?" "Completely," she said, though her tone was gentle. "You laugh more. You listen. You build things instead of tearing them down." He looked down at his cup, steam curling between them. "You're the one who taught me how." There was something in his voice, quiet, sincere, that made her heart ache in that strange, warm way she'd come to know only around him. She reached across the table, brushing his hand lightly with her fingers. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that time sent us back for a reason?" Draco arched an eyebrow. "You mean beyond nearly killing us both?" She laughed under her breath. "Yes, beyond that." He considered her words. "Maybe. Or maybe time doesn't have reasons at all. Maybe it just gives us moments, and we're the ones who decide what to do with them." Hermione smiled faintly. That's a very un-Malfoy thing to say. Careful, Granger, he said, though his smirk was playful. If you keep complimenting me, I'll start thinking you like me. She tilted her head. I think that happened long ago. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The air between them was filled with the soft percussion of rain and the quiet hum of something that had grown too real to deny. Then Draco leaned forward, and she met him halfway. The kiss was unhurried, gentle, a promise rather than a declaration. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. Do you know what the strangest part is? She whispered. What? I don't think time ever meant to break us. I think it meant to mend us. He smiled, a small, rare smile that reached his eyes. Then I suppose it succeeded. The following months passed peacefully. Together they continued their quiet work. Hermione advising the Ministry on the safe containment of magical anomalies. Draco overseeing the reconstruction of old wizarding estates destroyed in the war. Their partnership, professional and personal, drew curiosity at first, astonishment even, but soon became one of those quiet truths the wizarding world simply accepted. They rarely spoke of what had happened in the 1940s. The memories were vivid enough to haunt their dreams, but they no longer hurt. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, Hermione would wake to find Draco standing at the window, staring out at the stars. When she joined him, he would say nothing, just take her hand, and the silence between them would be enough. Yet even in peace, time never stopped whispering. One evening in early autumn, Hermione received a sealed envelope from the Department of Mysteries. The handwriting on the parchment was elegant, unfamiliar. When she broke the seal, a single line stared up at her, written in precise black ink. Time remembers everything. There was no signature. She stared at it for a long while, her heart thudding. The words seemed to hum faintly with enchantment. When she touched them, the ink shimmered and vanished. Something wrong? Draco asked from the doorway. Hermione quickly folded the parchment. No, just ministry nonsense. But that night, she dreamed again, of the chamber, of green light, of a voice whispering her name from a place beyond years. She woke with a start, the sound still echoing in her ears. By morning, the fear had faded. The world continued as it always did, calm, ordinary, fragile. But deep within the sealed time chamber beneath the Ministry, the golden lens stirred faintly. Its surface rippled once, as though disturbed by an unseen hand. No light flared, no magic surged, just the faintest breath, a whisper of memory. And then, as if the moment had never happened, it stilled again. Life, as it tended to, moved forward. Years passed. The war became history, then legend. Hermione and Draco grew older, their faces lined by time, their bond deepened by years of shared purpose. The manor became a haven for scholars and students, a place where new generations came to learn about both the brilliance and the dangers of magic. On a summer morning long after, Hermione walked the gardens alone. The air shimmered with warmth, the roses heavy with bloom. At her throat, the small hourglass pendant glinted in the sunlight. She paused by the orchard where she and Draco had once laughed beneath the trees, and for a moment she thought she heard his voice again, low, amused, forever familiar. Granger, it whispered through the leaves. Don't start rewriting the universe again. She smiled, tears blurring her vision, and whispered back, never again. Then, in the gentle stillness of the morning, she turned and walked toward the house. Inside, in the great library they had built together, the last rays of sunlight fell across the shelves, lighting the gold lettering on an open book. Its title gleamed faintly, The Spell of Time. And beneath it, written in Hermione's neat hand, a single line read, "Some stories are not meant to be forgotten." Outside, the breeze carried the scent of apple blossoms and memory. The world turned, slow and steady, and time, at last, was content.